The last diplomatic courtesy. The great assembly hall stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian flooring, its crystalline ceiling reaching toward the artificial sky of Nexus Station. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked across that vast space with measured steps, her simple black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate costumes and natural displays of the alien delegates surrounding her. She had made this walk 847 times over the past 3 years, each time carrying the same hope that today might be different. Captain Marcus Webb followed 2 steps behind and to her left, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. The weapon was ceremonial here, but Marcus had learned to read the subtle body language of dozens of alien species. Today, something felt different in the assembly. The usual mixture of condescension and dismissive amusement seemed sharper, more pointed. The human delegation seats sat in the outer ring of the assembly, marked with the pale blue designation of provisional members. For 3 years, Sarah had requested that simple word be changed. For 3 years, she had been told that humanity needed more time to prove itself worthy of full membership in the Galactic Council. High Arbiter Zixthul of the Vorthak Empire rose from his throne-like chair, his 7-foot frame covered in scales that shifted from deep purple to angry red. The Vorthak had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 12,000 years, and Zixthul never let anyone forget it. His voice rumbled through the assembly's translation system with the kind of authority that expected immediate submission. The human delegation has requested, once again, to address the council regarding their membership status, Zixthul announced, making no effort to hide his irritation. We will hear their petition, though I suspect it will be as unreasonable as their previous attempts. Sarah approached the central speaking platform, her face calm despite the familiar sting of the High Arbiter's words. She had practiced this speech hundreds of times, refined it through countless diplomatic channels, and prepared for every possible response. But as she looked around the assembly at faces both familiar and alien, she realized something had shifted inside her. Honored delegates, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. I come before you today not with new arguments, but with a simple question. What more must humanity do to earn your respect? Prime Resonance Cathera of the crystalline hierarchy pulsed with pale blue light, her geometric form shifting slightly in what Sarah had learned was the crystalline equivalent of a dismissive laugh. When she spoke, her words rang like wind chimes in a storm. Respect is earned over millennia, young species. Your people have barely learned to travel between stars. We have watched civilizations rise and fall while your ancestors were still learning to make fire. Tendril speaker Morgash extended several of his dozens of tentacles in a gesture that translated as profound disappointment. The aquatic delegate's breathing apparatus bubbled as he spoke, his words filtered through the translation matrix. Humans show promise, yes, but promise is not achievement. You bring chaos wherever you establish colonies. You change things too quickly, upset the natural order that has maintained peace for centuries. Sarah nodded slowly, having heard these same arguments countless times before. Let me share what humanity has contributed to this council in the past 3 years, she said, activating a holographic display that showed dozens of star systems. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's atmospheric processing techniques have made 14 worlds habitable for the first time in galactic history. Human agricultural methods have ended food shortages on 37 colonies. Our medical researchers have eliminated 3 diseases that have plagued your civilizations for centuries. The hologram shifted to show trade routes and economic data. Human innovation has increased galactic trade efficiency by 40%. Our diplomatic courts has prevented 16 conflicts from escalating to warfare. Human-designed ships have rescued over 2 million beings from natural disasters across 40 systems. High Arbiter Zixthul's scales deepened to an angry crimson. Useful servants perform useful tasks, he growled. This does not make them equals. A tool does not demand a seat at the table with those who wield it. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but her expression never changed. Around the assembly, she could see other delegates nodding in agreement. These were species that had worked alongside humans for years, had benefited directly from human innovation and sacrifice, and yet they saw her people as nothing more than useful servants. Captain Marcus took a half-step forward, his jaw clenched tight. Sarah raised one hand slightly, a gesture that told him to hold his position. She had spent 3 years learning to control her anger in this place, but today felt different. Today, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the cold, calculating fury that came from being underestimated. "I see," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a new tone that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. "You view us as servants who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve." Prime Resonance Kethera pulsed brighter. Finally, understanding begins to penetrate human stubbornness. Yes, you serve the greater galactic community. This should bring you pride, not resentment. Sarah closed her holographic display and gathered her papers with deliberate care. "Then I believe this concludes our diplomatic relationship," she said, her words so calm that many delegates weren't sure they had heard correctly. Tendril speaker Morgash bubbled in confusion. "What do you mean, Ambassador Chen? Where are you going?" Sarah turned to face the assembly one final time. "If we are servants, then we serve at our own discretion, and we choose to no longer serve masters who show us such contempt." She touched a small device on her wrist, sending a coded signal that she had hoped never to use. The signal traveled instantly through quantum communication networks to every human settlement, research station, trade post, and diplomatic mission beyond Earth's solar system. In 14 languages and 47 alien communication protocols, the message was simple. Operation Homecoming is now active. Begin immediate evacuation procedures. High Arbiter Zixthol rose from his chair, his massive form towering over the assembly. "You cannot simply leave, human. There are contracts, agreements, responsibilities." "Yes, there are," Sarah agreed. "And we will honor every one of them. Every human settlement will be evacuated in an orderly fashion. Every piece of human technology will be removed or destroyed. Every research project will be concluded or transferred to human space. We will leave your galaxy exactly as we found it." The implications of her words began to sink in across the assembly. For 3 years, these civilizations had dismissed humans as junior partners while simultaneously depending on human innovation, efficiency, and problem-solving skills to maintain their way of life. Prime Resonance Kethera's light flickered uncertainly. "You cannot be serious, Ambassador. The atmospheric processors on Kepler Prime require constant human oversight. The medical research station on Arcturus depends on Dr. Rodriguez's expertise." Sarah smiled for the first time in months, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you should have thought of that before calling us servants. Dr. Rodriguez will be returning to human space within the week. I'm sure your own scientists can figure out her work. After all, we're just the junior species here." Captain Marcus activated his own communication device. "This is Captain Webb to all human security personnel. Begin Phase 1 of Operation Homecoming immediately. All civilian populations are to be evacuated within 72 hours. The assembly erupted in voices speaking dozens of languages, but Sarah was already walking toward the exit. She had spent 3 years trying to earn the respect of beings who had never intended to give it. Now they would learn what they had truly lost. Behind her, High Arbiter Zixthol's voice boomed across the assembly. "This is madness. You cannot survive without the Council's protection, without our trade networks." Sarah paused at the doorway and looked back one final time. "We survived for thousands of years before we met you," she said. "I think we'll manage just fine without you now." As the human delegation left the assembly, emergency sessions began forming among the alien delegations. For the first time in their long histories, they were beginning to understand that the species they had dismissed as chaotic children might have been the most essential part of their civilization. Across the galaxy, humans began packing their belongings and preparing for the journey home. They moved with the same quiet efficiency that had made them invaluable to galactic civilization. The difference was that now, They were using that efficiency to leave instead of serve. The great experiment in human-alien cooperation was over. What came next would depend entirely on whether the galaxy could survive without the species it had never learned to value. The galaxy learns what it lost. 6 weeks after Ambassador Sarah Chen walked out of the Great Assembly, the first cracks began to show. Trademaster Vulcan of the Vorthok Empire stared at the economic reports, scrolling across his display screens, his scaled hands trembling slightly as he processed the numbers. The reports painted a picture that should have been impossible. The Kepler Prime atmospheric processors had shut down 3 days ago. Without Dr. Elena Rodriguez's constant adjustments and innovations, the delicate balance that kept the planet's air breathable for 17 different species had collapsed. 2 million colonists were being evacuated to emergency shelters, and the evacuation ships were running out of space. Vulcan touched his communication panel with a claw that left scratch marks in the metal. "Get me the human research station on Kepler Prime," he commanded his aide. "Sir," the aide replied nervously, "the human research station was evacuated last week. They took all their equipment with them." "Then get me Dr. Rodriguez on Earth." "Sir, all human communication channels are returning the same automated message. They say that humanity is currently unavailable for consultation and to contact them again in 50 standard years. 50 years. Vulcan felt something cold settle in his stomach. Humans didn't think in terms of 50 years like the older galactic species did. For humans, 50 years represented 2 generations, half a century of scientific advancement, an entire lifetime of progress. They weren't planning to return next month or next year. They were gone. On the crystalline world of Zenthera's home system, Healer Prime Zenthera faced a crisis that threatened to destroy everything she had built. For 15 years, she had worked with human medical researchers to develop treatments for the Crimson Plague, a disease that had killed billions across the galaxy over the past millennium. The breakthrough had come just 6 months ago, when Dr. James Mitchell's research team had identified the genetic markers that made certain species vulnerable. Now Dr. Mitchell was gone, along with his entire research team, his equipment, his data, and his laboratory. The automated systems they had installed continued to produce the anti-plague serum for exactly 30 days after their departure, then shut down permanently. The shutdown protocols were encrypted with human quantum security that would take Zenthera's people approximately 400 years to break. She floated in her crystalline meditation chamber, her usually bright luminescence dim with despair. The anti-plague serum currently in distribution would last exactly 97 days. After that, the Crimson Plague would resume its march across the galaxy, and her people had no idea how to stop it. Commander Thane Morrison stood on the bridge of the human cargo vessel New Horizon, watching the last evacuation ship depart from the Arcturus Medical Research Station. Behind them, the station's lights went dark, one by one, as automated systems followed their final protocols. In 12 hours, the station would be nothing but an empty shell orbiting a distant star. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the communication station, "we're receiving over 3,000 emergency calls from alien governments. They're offering everything from trade concessions to territory grants if we'll return their human specialists." Thane nodded grimly. "Standard response, Lieutenant. Humanity is currently unavailable for consultation. Contact us again in 50 years. "Yes, sir." Kim paused, then added quietly, "Some of these requests are pretty desperate, sir. The Tentacle Dominion is offering us an entire star system if we'll send back the agricultural team from New Ceres." "I'm sure they are desperate," Thane replied. "They should have thought of that before they called us servants." The truth was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been the engine that made it work. Their ability to innovate, adapt, and solve problems that other species considered impossible had become so integral to daily life that most aliens had stopped noticing it was happening. The crystalline hierarchy discovered that 37 of their most important manufacturing processes depended on human-designed improvements. Without human engineers to maintain the systems, production ground to a halt within weeks. The tentacled Dominion found that their food distribution networks, optimized by human logistics experts, could no longer feed their population efficiently. Famine began spreading across 12 worlds. The Vorthok Empire faced the most devastating revelation of all. For the past 2 years, human diplomatic teams had been quietly preventing a civil war within their territory. Different Vorthok factions had been building toward conflict, but human mediators had diffused tensions before they could escalate. With the humans gone, old rivalries exploded into open warfare within days. High Arbiter Zixthul found himself commanding an empire tearing itself apart, while simultaneously dealing with economic collapse, food shortages, and the breakdown of critical infrastructure. He sent increasingly desperate messages to Earth, offering concessions that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. The responses never varied. Humanity is currently unavailable for consultation. Please contact us again in 50 years. Prime Resonance Cathera gathered the crystalline hierarchy's greatest minds in their most sacred chamber, a vast space where geometric forms of living crystal channeled the wisdom of their ancestors. The question before them was simple: how had they become so dependent on a species they had considered inferior? The answer was more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Human innovations hadn't just improved existing systems, they had become the foundation upon which modern galactic civilization operated. Humans thought differently than any other known species. Where older civilizations saw established patterns and accepted limitations, humans saw problems to be solved and boundaries to be pushed. They had revolutionized agriculture by thinking beyond traditional growing methods. They had transformed medicine by approaching diseases as puzzles rather than inevitable curses. They had redesigned transportation, communication, manufacturing, and diplomacy, not by following ancient wisdom, but by asking the simple question: what if there's a better way? The galaxy had dismissed this approach as chaotic and dangerous, never realizing that this chaos was actually innovation, and this danger was actually progress. Tendril speaker Morgash floated in his personal ocean chamber, reviewing reports that painted an increasingly desperate picture. The human team that had managed atmospheric controls for the underwater cities of 7 worlds had left behind systems that none of his people understood. The cities had 43 days of breathable water remaining, and no one knew how to extend that timeline. His own scientists, brilliant in their own fields, looked at human innovations like archaeologists examining artifacts from a lost civilization. They could see what the humans had built, but they couldn't understand the thinking behind it. The elegant solutions that humans had made look effortless were actually the result of a completely different way of approaching problems. Morgash had spent decades studying galactic history, and he began to see a pattern that terrified him. Every major advancement in the past 50 years could be traced back to human involvement. Not human leadership. The aliens had never allowed that. But human participation, human ideas, human ways of thinking that had been absorbed into projects and then credited to the species that had supervised them. They had been stealing human innovations for decades without even realizing it, then dismissing the species that had made those innovations possible. The communication requests from across the galaxy became increasingly frantic. Species that had barely acknowledged human existence were now offering massive concessions for even basic human assistance. They offered territorial rights, voting privileges, seats on governing councils, trade advantages, and technology sharing agreements that went far beyond anything humans had originally requested. Ambassador Sarah Chen, now back on Earth, reviewed these offers with her senior staff in a conference room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The irony wasn't lost on her. The aliens were now offering everything humans had asked for and more, but only after proving they had never understood what humans had brought to galactic civilization. The Vorthok Empire is offering us membership in their ruling council, reported Dr. Mitchell, who had returned from his medical research station just in time to watch alien civilizations begin their slow collapse. Full voting rights, territorial control over 12 star systems, and a formal apology from High Arbiter Zixthul. Sarah looked out at the ocean, where human ships were returning from across the galaxy, loaded with people, equipment, and knowledge that alien civilizations were now desperate to retain. What do you think, Dr. Mitchell? Should we accept their generous offer? Dr. Mitchell smiled grimly. They called us servants, Ambassador. Servants who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve. I think they can solve their own problems now. The final message from Earth to the Galactic Council was brief and polite. Humanity appreciates the Council's recent offers of partnership. However, we have decided to focus our efforts on internal development and exploration of regions beyond current galactic civilization. We wish you success in your future endeavors. The message included one additional line that would be remembered for generations across dozens of species. Perhaps in 50 years, when we are both older and wiser, we can discuss new forms of cooperation between equals. As human ships disappeared into the vast emptiness between spiral arms, the galaxy began to understand what it had lost. They had rejected a species that could have been their greatest partners, and in doing so, they had rejected their own future. The civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for millennia now faced a choice: learn to solve their own problems without human innovation, or slowly decline into irrelevance while humans built something new among the stars. Either way, they would have 50 years to think about whether treating potential equals as servants had been worth the price they were now paying. In the depths of space, human exploration fleets pressed into regions no galactic civilization had ever dared to explore, carrying with them the knowledge, innovation, and determination that had once served others, but would now serve only humanity's own destiny among the stars.